our last editorial event of 2024. I'm Anna Palmer. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. Thank you all so much for joining us in person, on the live stream. Hi to all our watchers on C-SPAN. We appreciate you as well. We are thrilled to have our last New Power Players conversation in partnership with Arnold Ventures this morning. We are going to be joined by two senators-elect, John Curtis, the Republican from Utah, and Elissa Slotkin, the Democrat from Michigan, to talk about news of the day, what's happening at the end of the year, and bipartisanship from their time in the House, as well as how they are going to approach their new roles in the Senate. As always, if you like what you hear or you have some interesting things to say about it, please share it on social media. You can find Punchbowl News at Punchbowl News on all social media platforms. After our conversation with the lawmakers, I'm going to be joined by Sam Maher. He's senior advisor to the Arnold Ventures, and we're going to talk about some of the work that they're doing in Washington as well. As always, thank you all so much for joining us, and now I'm going to welcome the senators-elect to the stage. Thank you, Senator Slotkin, Senator Slotkin, Senator-elect Curtis.
How are you?
I'm about to call you Senator, but we haven't quite sworn in yet, so we'll stick with it a little bit longer. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Of course. Thanks for having us.
All right, so we always do a few news of the day topics before we get into the topic of the day of bipartisanship, and I'm going to start with you, Mr. Curtis.
I know it's coming.
It's easy.
Do you want me to answer before you even ask?
I like it. You'll do both of our roles for us.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of attention right now on President-elect Donald Trump and who he is looking to put into his administration and certain appointees. You have been named by a lot of folks as somebody who could be a critical vote on some of these kind of controversial or more controversial nominations. We're not going to spend a ton of time in this, but I do want to say, do you have concerns when it comes to Pete Hegseth at DOD, Kash Patel at FBI, Tulsi Gabbard at Intel?
Yeah, I think a really healthy. Well, by the way, I'm so pleased to be here with my colleague, and we're moving from the House together, and thank you. It's an honor to be here with you.
Yes, likewise.
And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Look, I think what it's easy to forget is there is an amazing process in place. And this process evolves over time. And there's a lot of look into people's backgrounds and things they've said. So I'm trying to be very disciplined and let the process work. And we saw with the first nomination for the Attorney General that it solved itself.
Right.
And I actually think some of these things, by the time it actually comes to me for a vote, will have resolved themselves. And those that have not, I will have so much more information than I have now that I just really think it's smart to not get too caught up. Let this thing play out. And I think it'll be far more natural than it feels right now.
So not a no or a yes on any of the three, but do you support getting some of these FBI vets? That's been one of the big things, the vetting and the process.
So the more information I have, the better decision I will make.
Yeah.
And I think that what it doesn't come up through the process, it's incumbent on me to do my own research, right? To meet with them and talk with them and ask questions. And I think that's healthy. And I think it's going to feel, and if you look back at other presidents who went through this, I think you'll see that it feels better at the end than it did at the beginning. And that's not to say there won't be some really, really hard decisions, but my guess is that much more of those decisions will be natural than it feels like right now.
All right, we will come back to you as the process unfolds, I have no doubt. Let's talk government funding. The big question, how long are all of us going to be here this month? No top-line deal has been reached. Timing is still murky. There's talk of a short-term continuing resolution that would allow President-elect Trump to put his stamp on kind of where government funding goes. Representative Slotkin, Democrats are going to be needed to pass this. What needs to be included? A farm bill extension, disaster relief? What are some of the must things that you think need to be part of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've seen this movie in the House a few times, and we know that in order to pass it, you are going to need Democrats to support it. So to me, a clean CR that doesn't try to get ahead of future President Trump and all the things he's going to want and all the things he's going to want to do. He'll have plenty of time for that. But a straight extension. I'm on the Ag Committee, so we need something for the farmers. We have to do something. Disaster relief, of course. And I think we know what we have to do. And, I have now, as someone who's been in the House for 6 years, I've watched like Christmas, the threat to the Christmas holiday does a profound amount to bring bipartisanship and to bring a quick, efficient process. So I'm looking forward to that stress being put upon people and us living up to that very low bar challenge. Yeah.
Mr. Curtis, on that note, though, there's been some discussion among Republicans. Should it be a short-term CR, like Speaker Mike Johnson has suggested? Should it be a longer CR, right? Is there some concern that if it's shorter, that this is going to kind of mire Republicans for the first couple of months to be just focused on government funding and keeping the lights on instead of some of President-elect Trump's other real priorities?
Yeah, and by the way, I agree with everything that was said. And the reality of it is, if you can't get 100% of Republican support, you need Democrats' vote. Therefore, all of those things are irrelevant, right? Because a much more relevant question is, what is it going to take to get Democratic support? We've shown, with one tiny exception, that we're not going to bring ourselves together, and in my opinion, that's bad on us, right? That's a bad look and a bad reflection, and means that we're working towards something that's not overall what we would first pick, and I suspect that we're going to, we've seen this movie before. We know what it's going to look like.
But any concern about this kind of more short-term CR, which it seems like where the momentum is, that all of a sudden, instead of doing tax reform, instead of kind of focusing on some of these bigger issues, that's where just keeping the lights on?
So for me, the concern started way upstream. Like by the time we're to this, whether it's 30 days, 60 days, it's like, does it really matter? The problem is way upstream. And if we're not dealing with this, this is all just, it's just pretending. It's playing office. And whether it's 30 or 60 or 90 days, I don't think it makes much difference.
All right, let's shift to the topic of the day, bipartisanship. I'm going to start with a few stats because I think they're really interesting. Representative Slotkin, you were ranked 14th overall in the House for bipartisanship, according to the Lugar Center. You were a co-sponsor of Building Chips in America Act, a very bipartisan bill. Representative Curtis, you are ranked the top most effective House Republican, according to the Center for Effective Lawmaking. You're also known for working on rural broadband and other bipartisan legislation. So that kind of sets the table, I think, for this conversation in such partisan times, right? I don't think that's what's getting a lot of coverage. It's kind of the fighting, it's what's going to happen that is super partisan. Talk about, and I'll first go to you, Representative Slotkin, talk about kind of your approach. How did you fundamentally come to Washington with that? Because it's different than, I think, a lot of other people.
Well, I mean, first of all, I've always come from a district that voted for Donald Trump and Elissa Slotkin on the same ballot. So that's a pretty different mandate than maybe some of my peers, right? It means the minute I walked in as an elected official, it was my responsibility to find the areas where we could agree. And I think over the last 6 years, I have tried to come up with sort of a philosophy on things, which is what are the things I should compromise on in order to get things done for veterans, for farmers, for people in rural communities, whatever it is, and what are the things I should never compromise on that are values, protecting our rights and our democracy. And that's kind of my model, which means there's a lot of overlap. I mean, John and I are the two senators-elect who are in the Problem Solvers Caucus. Mm-hmm. So we're in a caucus where you choose, you literally sign a civility pledge, and it's equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans, and you're working on common legislation. That's a choice. And it's not that that's an easy choice. Sometimes people in my own party are like, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. But they're not my boss. The people of Michigan are my boss. And they just demonstrated again that they have very independently minded views, right? They voted for Donald Trump and Elissa Slotkin. So I see it as a mandate. I'm proud of that. Does not make it always easy. Yeah. There's a lot of people, that I work on bills with where I'm like, why'd you have to say that on social media? Like, why'd you have to stake out that position? But I'm trying to get something done for a community in my district, so you grit your teeth. Mm-hmm. And I think this idea of standing on principle, like I'm not going to work with the other side because I don't like a lot of what's coming out of them, that may be nice and academic for some people from a very blue district. It just does not represent where Michiganders want me to be. Yeah.
So when you mentioned that you're from a district where you won with Donald Trump, I'm thinking, what's the big deal? Donald Trump won in my district, too.
Uh-huh. Try it, buddy.
But I point that out because it also presents a very different problem, a different set of problems, right? Where you're expected to go along in this mold and be a certain way. But I'll tell you, I do a lot of town hall meetings, and I think people's heads are about ready to explode because why can't you get something done? Yeah. And I find that they do really reward people who get things done. It's hard. You have to get through the noise and you have to get through all the things. But at the end of the day, I think my district really rewards. And I'll just brag for a minute that I pulled off just shy of 50% in a 4-way Republican primary. And it's because I've been able to show what you pointed out, that I get things done. I was a mayor before I came to Congress. And mayors like to brag that like we make good members of Congress, because in your city, they don't care about the politics. They want their trash picked up. They want the potholes fixed. And we tend to come with more of a mentality of, let's just get things done. And then the last point I'd make very quickly is, I think those who come to get things done are disproportionately heard of in social media and on cable news. There's more of us than you would think. And there's more of our colleagues who wake up in the morning, Republican and Democrat, and say, hey, what can I do for this country, than you see on social media or in cable news. And I wish we could flip that, but it's just reality.
Can I just add to that? I mean, bipartisanship is like deeply unsexy to people. It's not It's boring. It's not cliquey. Yeah. It's not like, and I can't tell you how many times, particularly out of the problem solvers, we would go to the press and be like, we just, agreed on this bill. It's this big, even on sensitive topic like immigration, we did this bipartisan thing. And they're like, yeah, interesting. But if someone throws a bomb at another colleague, verbally, then it's like that's the person who gets, and so it is very difficult to think about how to make actual functioning government sexy again, or if it ever was, and it's a conundrum of those of us, I think, in the middle.
Yeah, and now I'll add on. We're rewarding the wrong behavior, and those who shout and scream and say, unkind things on social media, they fundraise off that. Right. They end up on cable news. The social media loves it, and the people that just show up to work, it's boring.
Yeah, bringing bipartisan sexy back right here. That's what's happening. That's something I didn't expect to be talking about 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. All right, I want to talk about some of the things that you have done across the aisle together, but then also with some of your other lawmakers, and then we'll kind of project forward in your new roles in the Senate. You've both worked on drug pricing, trying to increase affordability and access to generic drugs. Talk about that. That seems to be one of the areas where Republicans and Democrats 10 years ago probably maybe weren't on the same page, but now there are some areas when it comes to this that there's some work across the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, and actually it's a perfect example of kind of the philosophy I was talking about, like work with people whenever you can. First of all, this issue is one where people clutch me in the grocery store and they're like, I can't afford my child's inhalers. I can't send her to summer camp. Even though I can afford summer camp, I can't afford the 5 inhalers that they require me to have on site for her to go to camp. So I think I would say that I think we can agree we are paying too much generally as a nation for our prescription drugs, and there's a whole bunch of unpacking to do on that. But I don't think that there's a lot of disagreement on that. And then you have to go about trying to deal with it. In one of my most important drug pricing bills was good old-fashioned American competition, just transparency. Require every healthcare company that puts out and serves Medicare to put a little tool, like a GoodRx tool, on their website, so you can actually comparison shop the generic versus the name brand. We worked on that. We worked hard to make it bipartisan, and it was signed by President Trump. Right? And it was one of those like last minute, we came back, it was a last minute appropriations deal. So we kind of were like, holy moly, like how did that get in there? But I don't care, he signed it, and that makes it better for my constituents. But I do think as a nation, there are very few things that you can get everyone to agree with, and I think we are paying too much for our pharmaceuticals. People know it, they feel it in their bones, and therefore it's a good launching pad to actually work together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard to add a lot to that. I would double down on this, that people know something's like broken, and they want it fixed. And it's hard for them, it's hard for us to put your finger on exactly where it is. It's very, very complicated, the layers of complication. To give you one example, I once took an attempt at the instructions you get when you get a prescription drug being digital, and well, guess who fought me? The paper companies, right? And it shows you the layers of complication to this that are hard to undo.
And the different kind of, industries, right, that you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, they're going to have a vested interest in what's happening,
right.
But are clearly intertwined in that system. I want to talk about rural broadband. I'm from North Dakota. You all have a lot of rural areas in your states. I know, Mr. Curtis, I think you said frontier, or rural is 3 hours when you haven't seen a structure. First, explain what rural means to you in Utah, and then what you've been working on when it comes to rural broadband.
You're getting a little slice of a green room conversation we had before we came in, because I have this pet peeve where my colleagues from the East Coast will stand up and brag that they have rural, and I just laugh, right? And so I've come up with a definition of rural, and that is, can you drive 3 hours without seeing a structure? Right, that is my district. That is my reality. That 80% of my district is very, very rural, and not only rural. It's labeled, half of it is labeled frontier, which is a step down from rural. So imagine COVID comes along, and you have no ability to get broadband out there, and this is a big deal because broadband, it was the link, right, to get these people what they needed. And I have, the reality of it is I have a district where I have some parts of it without running water and electricity, let alone broadband. And I think sometimes we see these as third world problems. They're right here in my district in America, serious problems.
Mm-hmm. And this has been something that I think, obviously, maybe I don't know if you have the same kind of frontier in Michigan, but obviously the Upper Peninsula, that's also a very rural area.
We have huge, areas where you can drive for hours and there's not cell signal or broadband.
Right.
And when COVID hit, it's not quite as rural, but I do have a rural district for Michigan, and 1 out of 10 residents did not have access to cell signal or broadband. So we had the kids at the Taco Bell taking their AP exams, on their laptop, sitting in the parking lot. And it's been an area of again, mutual agreement that we need this and we need to pay for it. A lot of our ARPA money, a lot of our dollars that came in, some of our most conservative county folks said, okay, we don't know about this money. And I said, well, you're welcome to give it back. Give it back to the Treasury. But if we're going to spend it, we're going to spend it on broadband internet because they heard such a cry from residents.
I want to talk about veterans. You mentioned it kind of earlier, and just the kind of that being one of the issues that really isn't partisan, right? Where you kind of have broad support in terms of healthcare, in terms of a lot of different areas. Where have you seen some work kind of across the aisle?
For me, the PACT Act, and this was, as someone, I'm a CIA officer by training. I served 3 tours in Iraq, armed alongside the military, live with the military, travel with the military. That bill is for the post 9/11 generation of veterans who lived in a combat zone where we burned our trash, right? There's no trash pickup. There's no John to pick up the trash in Baghdad when you're there. And so we burned it, and there's 23 different cancers associated with burning trash. And it wasn't just trash, it was a lot of stuff. And, we think that that's getting up to 3 million more veterans access to VA care. And again, that was a largely bipartisan bill. Sometimes it took folks longer to get on, but at the end of the day, when I think back on my time in the House, and I think about my top 5 things I'm proud of, that is right up there, because I can see people in my district going and getting that intake exam and actually getting care from our great VA facilities. Yeah.
So I think it's a really good example to point out something kind of unexpected and how much more bipartisanship there is than you expect. I would point to telehealth. Mm-hmm. In my district, this very rural district, imagine if you're a veteran and you're 3 hours away from a veterans hospital. Well, the bipartisanship nature of telehealth has made so much difference in rural parts of Utah. And it's hard to find a healthcare issue that's more bipartisan than simply telehealth. And that's kind of a product of COVID, where we came together, and there's still a lot of support for that.
So I want to project forward. You're in your temporary offices for now, and then you get sworn in January. Talk to me about what the spirit of bipartisanship. Where are you going to kind of focus your efforts as you think about kind of moving forward into this next phase in the Senate?
Well, I'll tell you, the low-hanging fruit is permitting reform, and everybody's talking about it. Everybody knows how important it is. If you want to talk IRA, a lot of those dollars are locked down because of permitting reform. It's where I spend a lot of time in the House. I hope to spend a lot of time in the Senate and maybe even get something through before the end of the year. But it's big, and it directly impacts inflation, directly impacts the cleanliness of our fuel sources. It directly impacts the economy, national security. I mean, it's hard to find an issue that's more impactful and that's more bipartisan than permitting reform.
Before the end of the year?
Well, I think so. There are some proposals out here. I don't think the chances are high, but everybody's talking about it, right? And I think the reason we haven't been able to get anything done yet is, although everybody's talking about it, they're still speaking different languages.
Yeah.
And nobody's quite figured out the one language that's going to work to bring people together.
Yeah, and that's a good issue. Again, doesn't always make me the most popular person with our environmental community, but people need an answer when they're trying to do things in our country, and it can't take 15 years to get an answer for very basic things. So I would second that. I think, one of the things that I'm certainly thinking about is we have the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House. Is there something, I asked in my first couple of days in Senate school, I said, are there bipartisan caucuses? Are there bipartisan things? And I think most of the experienced senators said, well, look, there's only 100 of us. Do what you want to do, make your friends, go on congressional delegations. You don't need that kind of a thing. And I leaned over to John and I'm like, I think the country needs us to do something, right? I think it's also about saying to the country, we can be normal and get things done, and you do still have people who are not extreme. And I think there's an importance to being visible about that. So I don't know what that means, whether there's a similar type caucus or we just are more deliberate about going out for, a soda or a pop, as I would say. I think we just need to be more deliberate because I think the country needs to see it.
All right, we're quickly out of time, and I know you got to get to vote on who's going to be the next leader in the Senate.
The suspense.
We aren't going to break any news here on that one, but I want to leave it here, which is, what is the one thing you think that could help Congress get more bipartisan? Is it creating more relationships? And we'll kind of rapid fire here. I'll start with you.
I think that the most important thing is for people to emulate the behavior that we teach our kids in school, which is treat each other with respect even when you disagree. Do that in public, do that in private, do that on social media. Live what you preach and set an example, because leadership climate in this country is very literally set at the top. So if, the commanding general is doing something wrong, you shouldn't be surprised when the lieutenants are doing something wrong. Similarly, when senators are acting badly like kindergartners, we shouldn't be surprised when people in the general public are really awful to each other, and we have a bigger responsibility than just one political fight.
I would say, and first of all, I totally agree with that. I would point out the more time we spend together, the more we get along and the more we find solutions. So whether it's traveling together or lunch together, any time we spend together is valuable time, and we need to do more of that. Every time we do it, it's a good experience, and we just need to do more of it.
Thank you both so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We'll give you a round and let you go back to your votes.
Thanks so much.
Hey, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.
All right, now I'd like to welcome Sam Marr, Senior Advisor to Arnold Ventures, to the stage. All right, Sam, thank you so much. Good morning. It's a tough act to follow. We had discussed in our call maybe having some hot sauce. We did our own hot ones. I don't think I will make you take one bite for bite here, but I did give it to you as a gift to bring back.
This is a good preview for next time.
I know, exactly. We've been brainstorming to get things in 2025, so
thank you for that.
You can stay spicy on that one. All right, Sam. Thank you so much for your partnership and for joining me this morning. For those of us in the audience that haven't been to an Arnold Ventures partnership event with Punchbowl News, talk a little bit about Arnold Ventures, how it came to be, and what you all stand for.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me here. Thanks for creating this beautiful event. Thank you all for being here today. Arnold Ventures is the philanthropy of Laura and John Arnold. We are based in Houston, Texas, and we're about 130 folks in the organization across Houston, DC, and New York. And we cover a lot of different issue areas, from criminal justice reform to healthcare affordability to infrastructure, climate and clean energy, and many more.
So Bipartisanship is the theme of today's event. We've kind of had a theme throughout the years, speaking a lot to some of the new power players in Washington and how they're kind of approaching these issues in a bipartisan way. How does Arnold Ventures try to really focus on bipartisanship?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things that make Arnold unique in terms of a philanthropy. One of them is that we focus specifically on policy change. And the reason why we focus on policy as opposed to direct services, where a lot of other philanthropies do, is because we believe that changing policy is the greatest lever to improve the most people's lives at scale. So if you care about policy change, then you should also care about bipartisanship, because in order for any policy to be durable over the long term and withstand the swings of power, then it needs to be bipartisan whenever it can be.
So talk about some of the successes you've seen. I know evidence-based kind of approach is really something that Arnold Ventures takes really seriously. Where have you, criminal justice reform? I can think of many, but where are some of the things over the last couple of years that you've seen some success?
Yeah, so I think the first point you made about being evidence-based is also very core to how we think about our work. We tend to focus a lot on data and evidence when we come up with policy solutions and ideas. And I think that has generally led us to be quite skeptical, because a lot of policy ideas, however good they sound and how logical they may feel and how well-intentioned they might be when they're designed, once they are actually put to the test in terms of a real rigorous study to understand does this policy deliver the outcomes for people in terms of improving their lives, many of them actually fail to meet that test. And so we are generally quite skeptical about most policy ideas when they are first brought to us, which leads us to be quite enthusiastic when we do find things that work. And so whether that's criminal justice reform, so understanding how to balance the understanding of risk versus wealth when it comes to deciding who to let out of jail, or whether it comes to prescription drug prices and how do we balance affordability and innovation. I think all of these are trade-offs that we have seen progress in over the last couple of years through different types of administrations and different balances of power.
So what are the opportunities, I asked the senators-elect, where they kind of see some opportunities? Permitting reform, I know, is something that you all have focused on. Where do you see some of the opportunities in 2025?
I'm excited about the next Congress. I think we talked about permitting reform. I mean, all of us can agree that we as a country, especially when it comes to energy abundance, when it comes to building infrastructure, we need to get better at building things on time and on budget. That's something that Republicans have long argued for, cutting red tape and reducing bureaucracy. And Democrats are starting to come to the table understanding that the legacy of the clean energy investments they made through the IRA are not going to come to fruition if we're not actually building things. So I think permitting reform is definitely an exciting area. There's also an increased focus on how do we make government more efficient. And there's a lot of ways to improve the way that we deliver our health care, whether that's addressing the amount of spending we're spending on prescription drug prices or hospital billing practices. There's just a lot of ways that we can create more efficiency in there and not just deliver the best quality care for all Americans, but also do that at a more affordable cost.
I want to ask you kind of two final questions here. One being, is there one bill or piece of legislation that you really want to see passed? We talked about some of the veterans issues, healthcare, permitting reform. What's kind of top of your list?
Top of the list, I would say permitting reform. So the Manchin-Barrasso Energy Permitting Reform Act. Hopefully we can get it across the finish line during lame duck. And I'd say on the healthcare piece, something that we've been advocating for a long time is around reforming the way that hospital billing practices happen. It's a very specific topic around the billing practice where a hospital will acquire physician offices and then overnight double or triple the prices and say those are now all those doctors' offices are now hospitals as well, and so we can raise their prices even for the same standard of care, which is something that's quite bipartisan. Both parties agree that this is something that needs to be stopped.
All right, last question, which we often ask in these kind of conversations. What's the one takeaway you hope everyone here in person, on the live stream, watching on C-SPAN, takes from our conversation today?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're here to talk about bipartisanship. I have this printout on my wall. It's from one of Bruce Mehlman's PowerPoint presentations, and it shows there's been no partisan alignment that's lasted greater than 2 years over the last decade. So you can take away a couple of different things from that picture, right? One takeaway might be that we're in a very divided nation, and there are two warring parties that are polar opposites. And if that's your belief, which I think a lot of people do subscribe to, then perhaps your strategy is you got to pick the team that most aligns with your values and help them win, because only in winning will you get to set the policy agenda and implement your ideas. I think there's another way of thinking about that picture, which is what we believe at Arnold. I think that's what we heard these two senators believe, which is that, and it's also what is written at the top of Bruce's slide, which is be bipartisan. You need friends on both sides of the aisle, because in order for any policy solution to endure those swings of power, you really need to find friends on both sides of the aisle. And that's what we are about at Arnold Ventures. That's what I believe these senators are about. That's why we're excited to be here sitting with them and hearing from them. And I think that's what you guys do really well at Punchbowl. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, we heard some news here. Maybe there's going to be a Senate Problem Solvers Caucus. We'll have to see. On that note,
Hope so.
We are going to run out of time. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. A big thank you to Senator-elect Slotkin and Curtis's team, and them for joining us on a very busy day here in Washington. We are going to have a ton more events in 2025. Look forward to seeing you all then. Have a great day and stay safe, everybody.